Hanoi at the end of the 19th century was a cholera city. Waste went into open drains. The drains went into the lakes and the river people drank from, and every monsoon it all came back up into the streets. So the French administration laid more than 15 kilometers of sewer pipe under the city, and that was the right thing to do. Getting sewage underground has saved more lives than any drug we have. The rats were in it within months. Warm, dark, nothing down there that hunts them, and, this part nobody planned, connected to the indoor plumbing of every villa in the district. Frenchmen began finding rats coming up into their bathrooms. So the city started buying rats, a cent each, then a cent for every severed tail handed across a counter. Within months there were men in the villages outside Hanoi breeding rats on purpose. I'm Arthur Beckett. I have been paid by the piece on a field survey, and I know what it does to what you find. Rats and sewers go together for a reason that has nothing to do with filth, and everything to do with real estate. A rat wants three things: warmth, cover from anything that eats it, and a short walk to food. Above ground in Hanoi it had none of them reliably. There were dogs and cats and snakes and people, and the food was scattered across a city. Underground it had all three at once. The historian Michael Van's phrase for what the rats made of that network is the best line in the scholarship: an ideal system of mass transportation and access to the city's poshest addresses. And here is the part that decided everything. The pipes went under the French Quarter, Paul Doumer's grid of wide boulevards laid out to make Hanoi the capital of Indochina, the Vietnamese Old Quarter, where the overwhelming majority of the city actually lived, got what Van describes as hardly more than a drainage system, still emptying into the lakes, still backing up every wet season. That mattered practically, not just morally. The men who would have to go down into those pipes were not the men who lived above them. Teams of Vietnamese rat catchers went in through the manholes in the spring of 1902. They were paid by the rat, 1 cent each, a piece rate. In their first week, the 26th of April to the 1st of May, they brought up 7,985. The administration was not paying for fewer rats, it was paying for dead rats, and those are not the same purchase. It had no way of telling them apart either, because no Frenchman ever went down that manhole. White men did not do manual labor in Colonial Hanoi. The only people who knew what was happening under the boulevards were the people being paid by the piece, and their supervisors could not speak their language. The counts climbed all through May. Over 4,000 a day by mid-month, 15,041 on the 30th. Consistently over 10,000 a day into June, and then on the 12th, the peak, 20,114 rats in a single day, with a day in early July that nearly matched it. I have to stop on that figure, because you may have met it before wearing a different face. The version that has gone round the world says 20,112 on the 21st of June. Van's article says 20,114 on the 12th, and he repeated the figure and the date in an interview years afterwards. A digit and 9 days were altered somewhere between the archive and the internet by one magazine piece in 2017, and no version I can find that carries the wrong number predates it. The encyclopedias have it, the podcasts have it, the Vietnamese press has it, and one outlet has since pushed it to 22,000. I have repeated it myself, which is how these things travel. You take the number from the retelling instead of the source, because the retelling is the one you can open. Now, with the sewer teams producing figures like that, the administration opened the payment to everybody, 1 cent per tail over the counter. I cannot give you the date they did it, and I have looked. Every other event in this story carries a day and a month, and this one does not appear in the scholarship at all, which matters, because the whole shape of what follows depends on the tail bounty coming after the professionals. And I can tell you the record supports that ordering without being able to hand you the day. They asked for a tail because a tail is easy to carry and easy to count. That was the entire reasoning, and it was sound administrative design right up to the moment it met the people it was designed for. Before long, there were rats going about their business in the streets of Hanoi with no tails on them. If the money is for the tail, the animal is worth more alive. You take the tail, you let it go, and it goes back to producing more tails. Then the health inspectors went out into the suburbs and found the rest of it. People were breeding them. Van's line is that officials found more enterprising but equally deceptive individuals actually raising rats to collect the bounty. Beyond the city there was a smuggling network moving rodents into Hanoi from across Tonkin, because a rat caught 200 kilometers away is worth exactly 1 cent when it reaches a French counter. The regime scrapped the program, and on Van's reading of the record, the administration's best efforts at extermination had increased the rat population of the city. I have been on the paid by the piece end of this, and it is not a story about dishonest people. Some years ago, I worked a wet season survey on a floodplain forest where we were paying local assistance per nest located, a fixed rate per nest in cash at the end of each week. Within about a month, the numbers were beautiful and the map was wrong. Nearly every record was falling within 50 meters or so of the trails, and the size distribution had quietly shifted toward the small, easy ones you can spot from a path. Nobody had lied to us. They had heard exactly what we said because we had said it in the only language a piece rate speaks. We said, "Bring us nests." So they brought us nests from the ground where nests are quick to find, and they walked past the flooded interior where the difficult and interesting ones were, because the flooded interior is slow and pays the same. It took us longer than I want to admit to work out that the survey had not been corrupted. It had been answered. There is a part of the Hanoi story that almost never gets told, and it is the part I would keep if I could keep only one. The men in the sewers worked out that they had leverage. They began stopping work, strikes and deliberate slowdowns, and used them to push the piece rate up. 1 cent became 2 in July of 1902, and 4 cents by 1904. Van places that some 3 decades before the strike waves that Vietnamese labor history usually begins with. The French response survives in the archive. On the 9th of June 1902, the resident superior of Tonkin wrote to the Governor-General's office passing on complaints from French residents about the presence, the sight, and the odor of the native rat catchers. They had built a city in which the men who cleaned the pipes were not supposed to be visible in the streets above them. Then they paid those men by the piece to carry dead animals up out of the ground and through the boulevards to a counter. Nobody had thought that through. The plague came the following year. The 1903 outbreak produced 159 reported cases and 110 official deaths among the Vietnamese population, plus 6 Europeans infected and 2 dead. And Van flags that the true figure was certainly higher, because colonial counts of Vietnamese deaths were not reliable counts of anything. A second epidemic from 1906 to 1908 produced some 263 official plague deaths. What Van does not say is that the bounty caused it. He attributes the plague's arrival to the shipping and traffic around the International Exposition Domer staged in the city that winter. The narrower and worse sentence is the one to hold. The campaign did not reduce the rats, and the plague arrived the following year. If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe. I only make these when the record actually supports them. Nebraska left a better paper trail for the same arrangement. The state paid $4 a scalp, 3 from the county, 1 from the state auditor. In January 1902, the auditor's office was investigating the claims because the numbers coming in implied the wolf population was going up rather than down. One farmer had trapped several animals, penned them, and raised more than 100 over a single summer. Another had reared 50 or 60 and killed them in the autumn for the scalp money. A contemporary observer noted that it paid better than hog raising. 3 years later, a Nebraska paper reported that county clerks could not reliably tell a wolf scalp from the scalp of a yellow dog, which is worth pausing on, because the statute covered wolves, coyotes, and wildcats together, and a great many of the animals being cashed in were almost certainly coyotes. That is the story the world tells about cobras in Delhi, for which nobody has ever produced a document. It happened in Nebraska. The state auditor investigated it, and it is in the newspapers. It has not stopped. Utah has paid $50 a coyote since 2012, over 100,000 animals in 7 years, and in 2018, the state's own wildlife division found hunters collecting Utah bounties on coyotes shot in Wyoming and Idaho. Their objection was not really the money. It was that the fraud had ruined the data they needed to tell whether the program worked at all. So they patched it. From 2019, you must submit a geo-referenced photograph of the kill site through an app, a better proxy, to shore up a broken proxy. China ran the largest version of this that has ever existed. On the 12th of February, 1958, the party Central Committee and the State Council directed the country to eliminate rats, sparrows, flies, and mosquitoes within 10 years or sooner. For the sparrows, the method was to deny them anywhere to land. Drums, gongs, and pots banged continuously across whole districts until the birds dropped out of the air, plus nests torn down and eggs destroyed, organized through every commune, factory, school, and army unit in the country. The kill figure usually quoted is around 2 billion. That number comes from the office that ran the campaign, reporting on its own performance in the period when Chinese official statistics are least trustworthy, the same reporting system that produced grain yields researchers now refuse to use. Economists working from habitat suitability rather than from those kill reports have estimated the campaign cut rice yields by about 5% and wheat by nearly 9%, and cost on the order of 2 million lives in the famine that followed. Set that against a famine whose death toll is put at anywhere between 15 and 45 million, and you get somewhere between 4 and 13% of it, which is as precise as anyone can honestly be. The sparrows did not cause that famine. Collectivization and procurement, and the refusal to open the reserves caused it. But a state chose a target it could count, and a couple of million funerals came out of the difference. Mao ordered the sparrow killing stopped on the 18th of March, 1960. 3 weeks later, the National People's Congress struck the sparrow from the list and replaced it with the bedbug. The other half of this is what happens when you dig the tunnel in the first place. A canal opened around Niagara Falls in 1829 to carry ships between Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, and was cut deeper and wider 3 times over the century that followed. The sea lamprey, a jawless parasite that fastens onto a fish and rasps through it, was recorded above the falls in 1921, reached Lake Michigan by 1936 and Lake Superior by 1938. Lake trout catch across the upper lakes fell from about 15 million pounds a year to roughly 300,000. Control costs about $25 million a year now, and it will cost that every year indefinitely, because eradication was never on the table. I will flag 2 things there, because the tidy version of that story is too tidy. The canal opened in 1829, and the lamprey did not appear above the falls until 1921, and nobody has convincingly closed that 92-year gap. And the Fishery Commission's own technical report found the Lake Michigan trout were already failing by 1943, 2 years before the lampreys became numerous. The fishing had broken the stock, and the lamprey finished something that was already going. And then Alberta, which is the only one of these that worked. Norway rats reached Alberta's eastern border in 1950. The province declared the rat a pest, made control a legal obligation on landowners, drew a zone 600 kilometers long and 29 wide down the Saskatchewan border, and hired inspectors. Salaried inspectors, walking 2,000 to 4,000 premises a year, with the province covering their full wages since 1975. It runs at something around $500,000 Canadian a year, roughly a dime a head, against Saskatchewan next door, which spends more than twice that and still absorbs 15 to 20 million a year in damage. Alberta does not pay for dead rats. It pays for people to walk onto farms and look. In the most recent year reported, it took in 875 sightings, and 47 of them turned out to be a rat. That is the whole distance. Hanoi bought tails, because a tail can be carried in a hand and counted on a table by a man who never has to go underground or speak to anyone. Alberta buys the hours of somebody who walks onto a property and looks at it. One of those produces a number, the other produces knowledge, and the number is a byproduct. When you cannot see the thing you want, you will pay for the thing you can count, and whoever you are paying will work out what you can count long before you work out what they are doing. There is a country that went at this from the opposite end. Rather than paying anybody to find its pest, Japan built factories and manufactured the insect itself by the 100 million a week and dropped them out of aeroplanes onto its own islands for 22 years. For now, thank you for following the pipes with me. If you want more stories about what happens when a measurement becomes a target, subscribe to the channel.